effectively what you have here is a chaining of him into his own sphere of activity, his realm.
This is a guarantee to the church. Remember, he's writing to the church, past and us. It says they cannot deceive the nations any longer. What's the significance there, Doug? Welcome to Kingdoms Unveiled, where we are trying to pull back the clutter that keeps us from seeing the supernatural nature of our world and our faith. We believe that our King is coming and that his kingdom is already here. We live in the already not yet. And unfortunately, the power of the gospel is often veiled in his kingdom. And so Doug and I want to talk about the war that we are in, which is with the kingdom of darkness, and that we believe that the supernatural nature of our faith, where words actually matter, and as Paul says, they actually tear down strongholds. All of this is a conversation that we like to have from a Reformed perspective. We're two Reformed Baptist pastors. Your hosts are Doug Van Dorn, who is the pastor of the Reformed Baptist Church in Northern Colorado, which is in Boulder, and he's been there for well over 20 years. And I am Jon Moffitt. I'm the pastor of Grace Reformed Church in Spring Hill, Tennessee, and I just finished my 7th year. It's a good number, Doug. Speaking of 7, we're talking about sevens related to the book of Revelation. So, like that segue? That's pretty good.
There you
segue.
go. So again, are we going to pick it up with the
totally.
Jesus on the water?
Yeah, this is your first episode because you looked at the title and you're wondering about it. Doug, this is our 3rd episode in a series that we're doing on the book of Revelation, particularly chapter 20, verses 1 through 3. And really, this is an introduction series before we get into our full series on the book of Revelation. So if you have not heard the first 2 episodes, this might be a little confusing for you. Go back and listen to those. And at the end of that episode, Doug, just so you know, just as a real quick recap, we were talking about the chaos dragon and the abyss and the connection between water. And again, if you didn't hear the episode, you're not going to understand my next question. So Doug, I asked you, how is this connected to Jesus walking on the water and calming the storm? And then I didn't let you answer it. So how would you respond to that?
Well, it's a picture, and there's some interesting things going on there that we don't have time to look at in terms of the language, but the language is hearkening especially to Baal, the storm god, and to Yam, the sea god, and Baal is Satan. So basically, in calming the water, Jesus is showing his authority over both of them. And my friend Brian Goodell has a really good picture of Jesus walking on the water, where effectively what the idea is that Jesus is taming the Leviathan. And so he actually has him riding on the back of the Leviathan. Like he's now tamed him and he's a horse and he's able to do whatever he wants to with him.
That's such a good picture. Shout out to his series if you haven't seen it. It's really good.
Chronicles of the Nephilim. That's in his 7th book in that series on Jesus.
We need to get him on here sometime soon. It'd be good to have him on. All right, so just so you and I are ready to kind of get in the next section, what we've covered so far is we have argued that John is writing about real events that happened in the, or let's call it the unseen realm, another realm other than the physical realm that we're in. It might be physical. I mean, the argumentation, Doug, is that realm possibly is physical. It's just we don't see it, and it interacts differently with
dimensionality. We talk about that, but that's for another kind of a podcast than this.
But I think it's healthy. No, it's healthy because we're talking about how we spiritualize things as if they didn't happen. It's just kind of like ethereal. But we're arguing that Revelation 20 should be read as something that did happen. This is Jesus as the angel ascending with the keys to we're going to call it the abyss, the bottomless pit. It's kind of not a great way of describing it. It's this realm, this
it's
chasm,
the realm of Satan, where Leviathan
the realm
lives,
of Satan,
and that's who he's going after here.
So we would say the realm of chaos, because what we made the argument for in the last episode was that this chaos is felt in our realm. Like, and the two, almost using the Stranger Things. This is not a plug for Stranger Things, but just how there's 2 different realms, but yet they kind of cross over. And so this is where we pick the story back up, because it talks about he takes a great chain and he seizes the dragon. So that's where we left off. So here's my next question for you. What is the chain? We already talked about bottomless pit. What's this chain? Since we're talking about realms and kind of it really happening, why is it describing a chain here?
Okay, so first of all, when I go back to what I was taught with all this, you have like this absolute throwing of the devil into this bottomless pit, and he's locked up with these keys, and he's chained, which means that he's not allowed to do anything whatsoever.
So the picture is chained on the hands and legs and the neck.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, he's utterly confined and he can't do anything. And so this is premillennialists, especially in the dispensational realm, have this kind of idea of a millennium where it's perfection. Like it's literally the true golden age. It's not a satanic golden age, a copy. It's the real deal. Nobody dies. There's no sin, all this kind of stuff. And the reason why they say that is because they're viewing the chaining as an absolute binding, using the next word that comes up, of Satan in this place that he doesn't belong and that he's been thrown to in a prison that he's never been to before. And now he's completely gone. Right.
Yeah.
So is this a complete restriction of activity? Well, you could think of someone, especially like Martha Stewart. Remember when she got arrested and had all of her problems? She was eventually let out of prison, but she was not let out of confinement. She still had to have those ankle bracelets on, and she was only allowed to be in her home. It's called house arrest. And why is that such a good analogy? Well, it's because we said that the abyss is the house of Satan. It's where he lives. And so effectively what you have here is a chaining of him into his own sphere of activity, his realm. And it doesn't mean he's not able to do anything. Martha Stewart ran her entire empire, even from prison, let alone from her house.
Right. Yeah.
It's not like she wasn't able to do anything. Al Capone, same thing. Like, it's very easy to run an empire from prison. Yep. And so this idea that he's completely restricted from doing anything, I think, is a misnomer. And let's look at some other ideas of chaining in the Bible. So you got Job 38:31 is a good example, a really good example. God asked Job, can you bind the chains of the Pleiades or loose the cords of the Orion? What in the world could that possibly mean? I mean, we're talking about constellations in outer space. So I think it's fascinating enough that binding and loosing are used together with the chains in that verse, because it's the same thing we see here. What's even more interesting is the Pleiades and Orion are stars. And we've seen throughout Revelation that stars refer to the heavenly host. You see it everywhere in Revelation, and of which Satan is most surely one of them.
Right.
So the relationship between constellations and Satan can't be irrelevant in my mind. Job 38:32 says, can you lead forth the Mazzaroth in their season, or can you guide the bear with its children? So now it's still in the same context of the chains and the binding, and now it's the leading forth and the guiding. Think about having a chain on the back of Leviathan while Jesus is walking on the top of him, right? What would the chain be there? It would be
keep him in check.
Exactly. Or it would be to move him where he wants it to move, like a bridle, right?
Well, typically, why do you put a chain on a dog?
Exactly.
To hold him back.
Exactly. So the bear is also a constellation, and it needs to somehow be guided. And the Mazzaroth, we don't even know what that word means, so they just keep it as the Hebrew word, but it probably means planets. The Vulgate says it's Lucifer, which is interesting. And the meaning is that these constellations rise in their own time and at their proper time. That's what the chain does. It causes them to act according to fixed laws that they cannot transgress now. Older people, and this is where I think Reformed theology can be very helpful to people, older people believe that this was due to an oath or a covenant that God made with the angelic host. And the oath and binding and covenant and chains are all intimately related idea, and keys. So for example, you have 2nd Enoch. It says this, fascinating passage, man. I wrote down the rumble of the thunder and the lightning, and they, the angels, showed me the keys and their keepers and the places where they go. And where they go in and where they go out by measure, they are raised by means of a chain, and they
Mhm.
are lowered by means of a chain, so that he does not drop the clouds of anger with terrible injuries and violence and destroy everything on the earth. What's being chained there? Well, the thunder and the lightning. And somehow it has this attached to the movements of angels. Very similar language to binding and loosing.
Mhm.
Okay. So I think what's going on here in the chaining up of Satan is that it something is happening with these keys and this locking and this chain that has to do with a covenant that's being made, that's giving laws, that
Mhm.
Satan is not allowed to transgress these laws, because there, and this will get to the next word, which is that Satan is seized, and we'll see this much more powerfully when we get to that. But
Mhm.
Satan is being forced to do what um, what he is restricted from doing, or he's being forced to not do what he's being restricted from doing. That's
Right.
what the chains are. There's a law. There's something higher that's now been placed over him that is restricting him. Now, is it an
Right.
absolute thing? Well, you have to get to the verse 3 to find out what he's restricted from doing.
Right.
But
So we'll have
that's the
to.
point of this, is that this is
Right.
all related to the covenant. And remember how we said last time that really, I think we're being pointed here to something that's already happened.
Mhm.
Jesus descended from heaven. The angel descends from heaven. That's language of the incarnation. The keys. Jesus holds the keys of the house of David. Why? Because he's the Messiah, the one born from that line. When did that happen? In the first coming. And now we're seeing the same kind of a thing here with the chains, that um, it's related to a covenant. Well, when was when was there a new covenant? Well, it was cut in Christ's death when he died on the cross.
That's right.
Right? And then it's enacted once he's raised from the dead and ascends into heaven.
Hmm. Okay, so um,
So again,
we're gonna
this is past tense stuff
right.
that if you know what you're reading in the other parallel literature in the Bible and in ancient Near East and in Jewish literature, it's all pointing to this.
So let me make a couple of connections here before we get into this next section, just so I can, for me and for anyone that's listening, the beginning of the story in Genesis 3, you can see that there is the collapsing almost of this realm already, because in the story you have Lucifer in the garden and he's bringing chaos, right? He is bringing confusion. Did God really say? I mean, that's confusion. That's chaos. Did God really say this? And so then he causes rebellion. And then what is promised? The seed, the promised seed from Eve, the Messiah that's going to come. And what do we get from that moment forward? He creates, you've got the two realms, right? You've got the realm that we live in, and then the realm that Satan functions in. You can call it the spiritual realm, the realm of darkness. Paul calls it the kingdom of darkness. So you got the kingdom of darkness, who tries to destroy our world through the Nephilim, who then tries to create chaos by religion, where you have all these other gods, and he turns the gods, and then you have, and this is where the connection is. You start getting the nations that are being controlled and deceived by these false religions and these gods who are rebellious, and they're calling to worship these gods. And so you can look at it and see that even Israel at times is being drawn away. What he keeps calling, he says it's idolatry. You keep cheating on me. I mean, the whole book of Hosea is describing that even Israel's being deceived, right? What's the promise of the new covenant? That he will come, he will pull out our heart of stone, put our heart of flesh in us, and so that we won't be deceived anymore, and we will walk in his ways, on ways that we've never done before. So then if you're talking about an event that has happened, Jesus descends physically, his ministry's here. That's the first 3.5 years. We talked about that last week. So what you're describing here is all of a sudden, apparently in this storyline, when Jesus shows up, this guy is causing worldwide chaos amongst all the nations. So then this leads us to this next section. What does it mean that he seized this dragon? He seized Satan. Somehow, because I'm starting to connect this all in the story here.
Right. Well, let's go back to what you said in the Old Testament. Why was he able to bring about this chaos? It's because that old covenant, or the old covenants, however you want to talk about it, whether you're dealing with the covenant of works, or you're dealing with the covenants God made with the various people in Israel in the Old Testament, and this is
Mhm.
Paul's main point, they're not able to restrain our sin. They're not able to overcome the chaos of sin, death, and the devil.
Mhm.
And so that's why they're able to do this. So you needed to have a new covenant with a perfect law keeper, one who does keep the covenant of works perfectly. So now that's been kept. And then he's able to, through, and this, I think the transition into what you're bringing here, through his power to effect exactly what he wants effected in the spiritual realm at whatever time he wants it to happen. Okay. So what does it mean that he's seized? Well, we think that pick him up and throw him into prison. Like that's what it means. And so
He got
it's kind
arrested.
of all, it kind of all goes along with that other way of reading this text. But
Right.
in Greek myths, this is the word kratos.
Okay.
And in Greek myths, it describes the innate presence of force and strength,
Mhm.
not just the exercise of it. It's an innate presence of it. It can mean to take by storm, or the power which the gods give to men. It can mean supremacy or victory. In the Bible, the overwhelming use of the word applies to the power of God.
Mhm.
In the New Testament, there is no place where man either has or can gain kratos power.
Hmm.
Well, that just points even more to what we've been talking about the whole time, that this has to be talking about Jesus that's doing this.
That's
It's
right.
not just some ordinary angel who somehow has power. This is the most powerful creature in the universe that God ever made that we're dealing with here. Satan, Leviathan, chaos itself, the very head of the Greek pantheon, chaos. The very top
Right.
God is chaos.
Right.
And yet somehow there is an entity, a being that has more power than he does. And that is what is being signified in this word seized. So it's not just that he's carrying Satan off to jail like a prison guard would do, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's that he has authority and power to do this in and of himself. He has the kratos power. Hebrews 2:14. Since therefore the children share in flesh and blood, he himself likewise partook of the same things, that through death he might destroy the one who has kratos of death, that is the devil. Isn't that interesting? So Jesus's kratos power is more powerful than the one who is the power of death, which is the devil.
Hmm. All right. So just from a practical standpoint, Doug, so you've got John who's writing this as a second letter, right, from his first one. He's writing at this point in time, it's safe to say the church is underneath immense amount of persecution, right? They're feeling the opposition to their faith. Is this fair to say right around the time this is written?
Most like, well, yeah, either date, whether it's Nero or Diocletian, yeah, either one.
Either one of those is not good. They were very violent. So you have a lot of believers as you read other New Testament epistles. Like I'm preaching through Peter right now. So Peter is dealing with Peter's writing from Rome, and he says, from Babylon, as a reference to the Babylon, the spirit of Babylon. So he's writing to these outskirts churches who've left Rome. They're on the outskirts of Rome, and they're feeling the persecution of their faith, and they're kind of wondering, like, I mean, literally in 2 Peter, they're even questioning, is Jesus coming back? Like he
Right.
keeps saying he's going to come back. So John, I'm sure, is aware of all of this, being that he's exiled himself. So he's writing to people to encourage them to not give up hope, right? The whole point of this is to say, let me tell you what you see on the physical realm. Let me tell you what's going on and what has happened on the spiritual side of this. There's a connection between the two. And so I can see them reading this. And if they have the understanding that you're talking about, and again, we tend to read things from a rationalistic, very revivalistic, physical nature, where we can only see things from one perspective, unfortunately, as Americans. But I don't think the early church, we would argue, we have been arguing, they didn't read their Bibles this way. So they're reading this, and they're understanding that, and they're feeling the chaos at the moment, right? They're feeling that it feels like things are out of control, and like, is Jesus really in charge? So as someone who's reading this, they're reading this going, wait a minute, he did what to the dragon?
Yeah, exactly. And it's not just for them. I was just thinking, because this is a book for the church until Jesus returns.
Right. That's
And
my
so at
point.
any time that the church is facing that kind of overwhelming feeling of chaos consuming them, like a lot of people have been for the last few years in our own country.
Last
Um,
4 years, maybe.
yeah, well, I'll take it back farther than that, but that's for
Yeah,
another
I'm just.
discussion. But the point is that is as a past tense, this
Yeah.
is the greatest comfort that you could have. It's basically seizing the dragon is reversing his fortunes.
Hmm.
It's signaling that his rule is ending. So
Hmm.
remember in Matthew 4:8, I will give you all the kingdoms of the world.
Yes, absolutely.
Well,
You're going exactly where I'm going.
so into that, as Jesus overcomes the temptation, then you go to John's gospel. Again, John's gospel, John wrote Revelation and John. And in fact, this verse I'm about to read is exactly parallel with the center of Revelation in Revelation
Mm,
12, which is exactly parallel with what we're reading right now. And the
mhm,
verse is this: now the ruler of this world shall be cast out.
mm,
So I take, as a good literalist, I take now to mean now.
mm.
It's an historical fact. It happened. Something insanely significant happened in the first century with Jesus doing the very thing that we're reading in these three verses. And in this case, the seizing then is showing Jesus's power that he now has as the God man because of his resurrection and ascension.
Right. Yeah. I mean, what happens next is he sees the great dragon, the ancient serpent, who is the devil and Satan. I mean, this just goes back to the argument that I'm pretty sure there's no one powerful enough to do that but Jesus, to go back and make the argument from that this angel is Jesus.
Exactly.
Right. Okay. So and then it says it bound him. And this is an important conversation, Doug, because uh, there's some confusion on this particular one when it talks about binding him. And we have alluded to it already a little bit.
Well, and we talked
The,
about it a couple of weeks ago. So
mm-hmm,
this one shouldn't be new
mm-hmm.
to people.
But it just as a reference to kind of come back when it says, okay, so he entered into his realm. He has a chain and he seizes him because he has the strength and power to do so. And
Uh-huh.
then it says he bound him for 1,000 years. Why is it, what's the binding? And I think this goes back to, we talked a little bit about, you were talking, I think that the chain, I think the answer for the chain and the binding is the same thing, right?
Yeah, I think so. And the keys, the whole thing is the same
Yeah.
idea. Okay. So we're
Right.
not going to deal with the 1,000 years today, but I
Right.
think by the time we get to the end of this discussion today, we'll have all the pieces in place for people to see why we would come to the conclusion that we would of when the 1,000 years is.
That's right.
Okay.
Which is
Because
what everybody wants to hear about. And we're
everything
going
we've
to
been
wait.
talking about has already happened.
That's right. Yeah. This is past tense. So then it says that he threw him into the pit. So what does it mean that he's sealed and shut the pit? He threw him into the pit and he sealed and he shut the pit. What's significant? Like, why is that significant when we're talking about understanding this particular section and the connection to Revelation?
Well, should we talk? Let's talk just a little bit more about the binding, just for a refresher
Okay.
for people.
Sure.
Because first of all, binding this is what happens to spiritual entities in other places. So, for
Mm-hmm.
example, Jude talks about how in the Genesis 6 episode, angels didn't keep their positions of authority and he abandoned their home, and he's kept them in darkness, bound with everlasting chains for the judgment on the great day. Well, it's the exact same language as here. Well, what's so interesting
Mm-hmm.
about that is if you go back and read the story in Enoch that Jude 100% knows about and is talking about, you have two
Yep.
characters there. One is Semyaza and the other is Azazel. That means that Azazel has been bound. That's what Jude is talking about. But
Mm.
here's the crazy thing about that. Azazel appears in the book of Leviticus as the one that the other goat goes to on the Day of Atonement. So what does that mean? That means that even though Azazel has been bound and locked up in these gloomy chains of darkness, waiting the day of judgment, he still has some ability to affect his worship on the earth today.
So same thing, going back to that house arrest idea.
It's the exact same idea. So even when people are reading their book of Enoch and they're like, okay, well, they've been locked away in Tartarus. Again, yeah, whatever that means, it means that at the core of it, that there is a power over them that prevents them from doing certain things, but not everything.
Yeah, and he doesn't tell us what that is. He just says that they are chained.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, it is interesting how we create categories and explanations where the Bible doesn't. And I think we end up missing things. Like in our minds, we only have, like, when we think of prison, we only have one category in our brain, like, oh, complete isolation.
Yeah, solitary confinement or something.
Solitary
like that.
confinement.
Even prison doesn't
even have
just
that.
Solitary confinement. The other thing about the binding to bring up is that, just like we've seen with some of these other ideas, it's intimately related to the idea of a covenant.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so in fact, the German word for a covenant is bunden, and that's the word bind. So,
interesting.
Covenants bind things, just like chains do. And what does that mean? Well, God made a covenant with the day and the night. In my mind, what that means is that he fixed the stars in their place. He keeps the ocean from going all onto the land. What does that mean? It means that he gave them laws that they have to obey, that they cannot transgress. They can't move past the boundaries that he has given for them, even though they're on a chain and the chain might be long. That's the idea of binding. So again, it's not absolute chaining and binding that we find really in any other place where this language is used in the ancient world. So why are we importing it here in this text? Well, it's because I think that we're just not reading the text as it's supposed to be read, as it wants to be read, as it was understood in its original context. We're bringing our own modern ideas into it, and then we're just, we're just running with it, going anywhere we feel like going.
Yeah.
Probably the most important thing about the binding, John, appears in Matthew 12, which is that Jesus is referring to his casting out of demons as a proof that he has bound the strong man. It's the exact same language as what's going on here, but it's past tense.
Right.
And who is the strong man? Well, he says the kingdom of Satan in that very passage.
Right.
And so as he's going about his ministry, showing his kratos power over the demons, he is proving to the world that he has the power and that he has bound Satan. Already. Right. It's already happened.
Right, which is even the question of what is he binding Satan by the power of Satan?
Yeah, exactly. So his power is the greater power.
That's right. Which, again, goes back to your picture of walking on the water, calming the calming the sea, and then casting out the demons, because they can't stop him from doing that. I mean, even when he shows up to the Legion and it's the pig scene, they immediately understand this is a power greater than us, because they were like, hey, you're the judge and it's not our time yet. Like, what's going on here? Okay, so that leads us, I mean, we've kind of been bearing the lead for a little while, so we'll get to it, to the key to this whole thing, which is, what is he sealing up? What is he saying? Hey, this is not going to get out of hand again. This is not going to get out of control. And it's that last section where he talks about, you will not deceive. So, what is he gets the chaos dragon, and he says, look, we're gonna put him under house arrest. We're gonna bind him up so there's certain that he can't do. Not only that, we're gonna shut it and seal it. Covenant language again. This is a guarantee to the church. Remember, he's writing to the church, past and us. So it says they cannot deceive the nations any longer. What's the significance there, Doug?
Okay, so this is kind of the capping off of the whole thing. So let's think about where we've come from. Jesus has come. He's descended from heaven. He has a key. He's won the keys, we'll say, at his descent into Hades. He has shown his great power through his ministry. He has done the seizing and subjecting of these authorities to public open shame in his resurrection and his ascension. All of these things are past tense. And we've seen how it refers to the first coming at the incarnation, and that nevertheless, Satan isn't necessarily in these words being shown to be absolutely gone from the scene. In fact, there's really nothing in the words as they're used in their original context that would lead you to that view. And so when it says, so that he might not deceive the nations, what we're doing is we're getting a purpose clause. Okay, so everything that we've read up till now has no purpose. Okay, well, what's the ultimate reason why Jesus is doing these things? Well, John tells you, so that what? So that he might not deceive the nations any longer. And we'll just stop there. We won't deal with the 1,000-year question here, but you can draw the dots to what we believe. Because let's think about this, and this is kind of where we did a couple of episodes ago that we talked about. But now I think we have a much better way of grasping why we would say the things that we said. There's only one reason that Satan has been bound in this context. And this is the only place that it talks about the binding of Satan in this way. And so that means to me, biblically speaking, there's only one reason that Satan is bound. And it's not deceiving the nations any longer. And guess what, John? Everything that we have talked about in this program up till now is now coming to very real, practical, working out application. People that are mocking the divine counsel, people who are saying that this stuff is nonsense, people who are saying you guys are just obsessed with talking about the supernatural, get on with something that's important. No, my friend, you have no earthly idea what you are talking about. You have no idea what you're talking about. Because when you understand that Satan had the kingdoms of the world in the old covenant, except for Israel, and God called them out of that world too, and simply created them out of nothing. And then out of Israel creates this insanely amazing church, bringing them into the vine, which is Christ, as branches, giving them new life. When you understand the transference of moving from darkness to light and Satan's power in that realm of darkness, this all of a sudden has all the meaning in the world to you, because Satan had the kingdoms and he held them in darkness, and they did not come to Christ. This is what Psalm 82 is all about, that we've had a couple of shows talking about. They were not leading the nations to the worship of the true God like they were supposed to. And so Jesus came down and did something about that and said, it's not going to happen anymore. I have elect people that go beyond the nation of Israel that I am going to bring into my family. Period. End of discussion. That the changes that took place on the day of Pentecost and moving forward to the very day that we're doing this podcast cannot be underemphasized at all. Like, we don't understand the significance and the radical changes that have taken place from the day right before that to that day. And it started with the Jews, we know that in Jerusalem, but as you work your way through Acts, it makes its way to the Gentile nations. And the whole point of that is it's showing that Satan does not have the power to deceive the nations. He had it, now he doesn't. This is what Revelation is telling you. And and therefore it has to be a reality when right now. It started on the day of Pentecost, and it continues until the second coming, with a little season, I would say, near the end, that whatever that's going to look like. I actually think that's what the whole book of Revelation is about, but that's for as we unpack how to read this book.
Tuned.
But let's just stay here and just think about the significance of this, right?
That's right. Yeah, I think going back to the point of the book, which we'll unpack more, that this is for the encouragement, and I would say to give spiritual strength to those who are suffering. Have you ever seen those videos where you got two dogs barking at each other, and there's something in the middle like a fence, and then they remove the fence, and you see the two dogs kind of like, oh, now what do we do? Like the threat is like, I'm gonna get you, and then now they're there, and in many ways, I think that's what Jon is doing. He's like, hey, listen, his power has been limited. I know it feels like the chaos is still here, and he's going to prevent us from succeeding, but he can't. He can't prevent us from succeeding anymore because God is the one who's holding him back. Like, well, I love this. What does Jesus say? Let me make a connection for us, right? So Jesus looks out to the disciples and he goes, go preach now the power of life, the power of the gospel. And how does he start? He says, all authority.
Dude, I know. I was just going to say this. Like, this is crazy. We're thinking the exact same thing because you know how all the gospels end? It's on this note. Now, you could make an argument that John, little different, but Revelation is kind of the end of John, if you think about it that way. And so this is actually the fourth one of these. But Luke ends this way. Repentance and forgiveness of sin should be proclaimed in his name to all nations, beginning from Jerusalem. Mm-hmm. And then he has Acts that proves it. Matthew, what you were just reading, all authority has been given to me. Go and make disciples of all nations. Mark, in the longer ending, ends this way. Go into all the world and proclaim the gospel to the whole creation. Whoever believes and is baptized will be saved. This is exactly what we're talking about. All Revelation 20 verses 1 through 3 is telling you that story in a different way.
That's right. I mean, going back to your connection with Psalm 82, where the gods that were supposed to lead the nations to Yahweh led them away. And how does he end the psalm? He says, arise, O God. We argue he's speaking of Yahweh. He's speaking of Jesus here. Judge the earth, for you shall inherit the nations. And this is the whole point of what you're saying in Revelation 20, is that Jesus has bound up the whole reason why the nations would be held in captivity. He's like, they're no longer going to be held in captivity. Therefore, and then what does Paul say? How will the nations come to be a part of this new kingdom? He says, how will they believe unless they hear? And how will they hear unless we preach? And so we walk around with the authority of Christ and his keys. He's been given them he gave the keys to the church. And what are we doing now? Through the message of the gospel by our mouth, what are we doing? We're bringing people back to the King so that all the nations will be underneath him once again. That's the point of Revelation 20, and that we believe that Jesus has been, not Jesus, but the great chaos dragon, Satan, has been bound now.
From deceiving the nations.
From deceiving the nations. Now, Doug, that being said, and this is the mistake that people make, and this is why it's so important from deceiving the nations, because his bite is not as strong as taking out an entire nation, but he can take out individuals, and that's where all of the or the church, that he can take out churches, but he can't take out nations. And this is why we have warning passages like Ephesians 6. So we have to stand in the strength of the Lord and put on the armor of God. Why? Because he still has the capacity to take us out, not take us out from salvation, but keep us from reaching the nations, right? Peter talks about it this way, that he says, this is 2 Peter, you become ineffective and unfruitful in what? In the knowledge of Christ. Well, what does the knowledge of Christ do? It tears down strongholds. It brings people from death to life. So when we aren't protecting because he says, be sober-minded, be watchful, your adversary, the devil, is seeking whom he may devour. He can't devour the nations anymore, but he can take out the messengers to the nations. And this is why there's so many warnings about it, that this is why this podcast exists, that we want to talk about how this confusion has happened, and that if we replace the gospel, or if we don't understand the point of Revelation properly, then we can find ourselves, ineffective and unfruitful in taking the gospel to the nations.
Yeah, I was thinking, I was thinking a bunch of things. Think about some of the language of the New Testament. You were called out of darkness into his marvelous light. That's the language of calling, and we're Reformed Christians. And when they hear what we're talking about here, even some people still will say, but he's still deceiving the nations. And what I want to say is, no, he's not. That's the whole point of Pentecost.
That's right.
We're not universalists. We're Reformed Christians. We believe in the doctrine of election, and we believe that God is calling out of the nations whoever he wants to call out.
That's
And
right.
Satan isn't stopping it because he can't.
Mm-mm.
Think about it. At one time you were in darkness, but now you are light in the Lord, Ephesians 5. Or arise and shine, for your light has come. The glory of the Lord has risen upon you. That's a promise from Isaiah.
Mm.
I mean, the power of this is just incredible. John 3, the Father loves the Son and has given all things into his hand.
Mm.
And that's not in the future. That's right now. God
That's
has
right.
put all things in subjection under his feet. 1 Corinthians 15. At the name of Jesus, every knee should bow in heaven and earth and under the earth, and every tongue confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, of the glory of God the Father. That appears to have been one of the very first hymns that was written in the early church.
Mm-hmm.
That was a now thing.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing that we've said that's post millennial. We're all millennial. We believe that that this is a now thing,
Right.
but that doesn't mean that we have to be defeatist about it. I think about a guy like John Knox,
Mm-hmm.
who begs God, give me Scotland or I die.
Yeah.
He doesn't go, well, I look around and I'm like, nobody's being saved right now, so I guess I should just throw up my hands because that Satan's deceiving the nations. No, he looks at this and he goes, Jesus has all authority and God wants the nations to be saved. And so what in the world is stopping me from doing that? That's the
That's
whole
right.
New Testament proclamation.
That's right.
And it's right
Yeah.
here in Revelation 20.
Right. And I think that in many ways, this is why you and I, no matter what the results might be right in front of us, we know what the promise is, and God's promises never fail. And I love how Paul says this, that some water or some plant, some water, but God gives the increase. And we believe that, right? We believe that God will bring the increase of those who are lost into his kingdom. And part of this, John wrote this to the church saying, okay, there's what you're experiencing physically. Let me tell you what's going on in the background of what has happened to invigorate your faith. And let me explain to you about what's going to happen. And you can see the connection that even though things may get really bad physically for you, from like a persecution, like Doug, even in America right now, man, we've been feeling this. You stand up for righteousness, and you get called all kinds of things. You say abortion's bad, whoa, watch out. You say homosexuality's bad, like you're a
You
bigot.
talk
all of a
about
sudden.
pedophilia and children and what they're doing to them. You don't even get people that are willing to talk to you about it.
That's right. So that's the part of, we should feel these experiences, read Revelation and go, oh, I know what's going on, right? But he can't win. He can't win because the ultimate power and the ultimate king who has proven his success, that's who I'm serving. And so even though the physical realm might be attacking me, the spiritual realm is winning. And that's where we put our faith and hope in. And this is why I love this. And I mean, I'm always thinking and talking about the things that I'm preaching, but in 2 Peter, he says that everything for life and godliness has already been granted us through his divine power, and his divine power is found in the promises of Christ. I love it. It's so good. So then, Doug, what should we be focused on? What should we be thinking about? The promises of Christ. Well, this is one of them. This is one of the promises that John told us, that he would come and he would show victory over Satan. And so we read this and go, okay, the nations will not be deceived anymore. The gospel we preach will bring people to faith, and we need to stay focused on that. We need to believe that and not get distracted with, worldliness, really, to be honest with you. That's what unfortunately, I think the modern church is wrapped up in worldliness because there's a whole lot of reasons. We go a whole episode into that. I'm not getting into that now. We're already at 46 or whatever, 48 minutes. So, well, this is a great introduction. If you were intrigued by this, then this is what Doug and I want to do for the book. We're going to break it up into chunks and help you kind of understand the flow, the structure. Doug keeps saying this, and I know some of you are like really upset. How is it that Revelation 1 and John 1 are matching? How does that work? Understanding how the book actually works in a cycle, or we'd say in a circle. So if you want to get ahead of it, you can go and get Doug's book. It's available on Amazon. There it is. Rings of Revelation.
That's the gold version. So that's the actual
yeah.
book. The silver version is the companion volume.
The companion
They're
volume.
different.
And hopefully one day we'll get it in audio format. We'll figure that out. Get AI to help us out. If you're like me and podcasts are helpful, then stay tuned. We're going to work through some of that. We're not going to work through the whole book. So I encourage you to go get that. But I'm excited because what's fun about doing a podcast with you, Doug, is that we're not here to talk about the data. We want to keep showing you why it matters to your faith and how it applies to your everyday life as a Christian. Hopefully that was today. Hopefully you're encouraged. If you're not a part of a good local church, we encourage you to go find one where they preach the gospel. They give you the means of grace. They have fellowship. They have, and they take the word of God serious. So that would be encouraging. If you and we said a couple episodes ago, if you can't find a church when we did the episode on fellowship, pray about starting one. Find a network that will help you do that, or possibly move so you can take care of yourself.
Exactly.
All right. So when we come back, my guess is, Doug, are we committing to this? We doing it? We're going to do Revelation. All right. When we come back, we're going to start on, I don't know what the title is, but stay tuned. Thanks for listening.